Good afternoon, everyone. Now, in the last lecture, we were talking about West Asia, right? I broadly discussed the map on West Asia. A couple of things about Iran and Afghanistan are left, which I'll discuss towards the end of today's lecture. But I wanted to first start with a fresh topic, that is India, Bhutan, and India, Nepal, right? If you remember, I think in the last lecture, I talked to you about how when you look from the geographical aspect, when it comes to the Himalayan states, whether that is Nepal or Bhutan, they're largely dependent on India for access to sea, given the landlocked status. And secondly, though in the north there is China, which can technically and theoretically provide an alternative sea route to many of these countries like Nepal and Bhutan, in practice it is very difficult to do so because the Himalayas present a huge Himalayan obstacle to be crossed by any even works of engineering. So that is one broad context. Now देखिए, आपसे अगर भूटान या नेपाल पे क्वेश्चन आएगा, it is going to be a very straightforward question, most likely in the light of the Chinese presence in South Asia. Okay, but you must have some idea about the India-Bhutan relationship, and then I'll discuss India-Nepal. Why I'm discussing Bhutan first and Nepal next is that if you look at the map of South Asia, you have Nepal in the Himalayan region, then you have the Indian state of Sikkim, and then you have Bhutan. Now, if you go back a bit in history, you will find that up till 1970s, Sikkim was also almost, one could say, an autonomous state or probably an independent kingdom in its own. Okay, and Sikkim became a part of India in the early 1970s, formally, fully a part of India in the early 1970s. Okay, so let me just kind of, it's a bit, and what I'm telling you here will eventually help you when ma'am is going to discuss with you China and the border issues and all those things as well. So if you look at, I'm going to draw a poor map, and there's a handout for India, Bhutan also that I'll provide you. The West Asia handout you'll get towards the end of today's lecture while you go. So if you look at, just for your understanding's sake, this is what is Tibet. This is what is the Aksai Chin region. Then you have Nepal. Then you have the state of Sikkim. Probably sitting somewhere here, you have Bhutan. And then this is the Siliguri corridor and other things connecting to India's northeast. So one of the first things that I wanted to kind of draw your attention to is that Sikkim, which is now a part of India, up till the 1970s, was an autonomous state which had good linkages to the Indian state, eventually was formally became one of the last states to be a part of the Indian state as we know today. Though that's a story not very well known amongst students, if I would say so, till they watch Sikkim Files, if it was ever to be made, right? So, and but it is in this context, the story of Sikkim partly tells also about Nepal and Bhutan. Why? Because if you look, Sikkim was also a landlocked state, much like Nepal and Bhutan. Sikkim eventually became a part of India. This is the biggest fear of Nepal. It doesn't want to go the Sikkim way, becoming a part of India. If you look at Bhutan, that is also partly a fear of Bhutan, but not so much. They also, all these states also have a constant fear that partly if Nepal today has had in the past a certain amount of fear of being a part of India, the bigger fear for Nepal, Sikkim and Bhutan consistently since 1949 has been that they may be understood as extensions of Tibet. And thus, once China in 1949, Mao Zedong and the Communist Party of China consolidated their hold over China. In 1949, Mao Zedong, the Chinese premier, gave what was called as a so-called One China policy. Under that One China policy, while Taiwan is one part in the South China Sea, which they often claim to be a integral part of China, under the same One China policy, it was argued that Tibet is also an integral part of China. Now, it is in this context, and I'll discuss with you in some detail right now, that as to once China started claiming Tibet as an integral part of China, in the same year 1949, Mao also made a statement that Tibet is an integral part of China under the One China policy, and at the same time, Aksai Chin, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and partly the Tawang region of what you know as Arunachal Pradesh and the portions of Arunachal Pradesh are an extension of Tibet. They are southern Tibet. Now, why does China claim that this was an extension of Tibet? Is primarily because of the presence of a large number of Buddhists in this region. A number of them have claiming their direct or indirect linkages to whom? To the Tibetan yellow hat sect of Buddhism. हमको इतना डिटेल में नहीं जाना. Yellow hat पहनते हैं वो. That's a yellow hat sect of Buddhism. The Dalai Lama is associated with the yellow hat sect of Buddhism. The Dalai and the Tawang, which is the birthplace of the 6th Dalai Lama and is considered one of the second holiest shrines of the Tibetan monks, is in Arunachal Pradesh. So Arunachal Pradesh, similarly Sikkim, Bhutan, and if you go back in the history of Bhutan, you will know that a number of times the Tibetan rulers of Lhasa have maintained contact with the Bhutanese rulers, and Bhutan also, the predominant religion is Buddhism. So in 1949, when Mao came up with this assertion that all these are a part of southern Tibet, Mao also made that so-called famous statement about how Tibet is the palm and these are the 5 fingers, which is an extension of Tibet. So but naturally, if Tibet is an integral part of China, then southern Tibet is also a part of China. And to that extent, sitting in 1949, one of the primary concerns for a Nepal or a Bhutan was this, that they did not want or they aimed to avoid any territorial aggression from the Chinese side. And 1949 to 59 is a story where you see, if you have seen a wonderful movie, 7 Years in Tibet. It's a good movie, 7 Years in Tibet. आप देख सकते हैं. तो तिब्बत में शूट नहीं हुई है, but I think it's Brad Pitt. So Brad Pitt is in that. It's a good movie. It partly tells the story of Tibet from 1949 to 1959. Okay, 49 to 59 is an important period in China-Tibet relations because it is between 1949 to 1959 that China made slow and one should say not slow, rapid advances into consolidating its hold over Tibet by 1959 broadly. I'll fill in some of those details and you can write it with me when I'll write. But what happens is that once China consolidates its hold over Tibet, it's an utmost matter of concern for obviously Nepal and Bhutan and also no doubt for India, given that Tibet was historically almost a buffer. Tibet was historically almost a buffer between whom? Between India and China. Once China consolidated its hold over Tibet, that buffer was no longer there. And India and China were now in the process of sharing a very long land border, which was not completely demarcated. Now, this was a matter of concern for India. It was also a matter of concern for Bhutan and Nepal. And Bhutan and Nepal now clearly saw that maybe it was possible. And if you go in British India ke time mein, there were treaties signed with Nepal and Bhutan, which allowed India to have a major say in the affairs or in the domestic affairs of Nepal and Bhutan also. But that was during British India. So these states also had this concern that Indian state may interfere in the internal affairs of Bhutan or Nepal. But now, between 1949 to 59, their bigger concern became China and the territorial aggression of China, which was clearly visible in Tibet, and they were now the next door neighbors of China. What? Nepal and Bhutan, just like India. Now, one of the things is, if you were to look at this was a very difficult situation for states like Nepal and Bhutan, to whom it was as clear as daylight that if left alone, they cannot, they will not be able to defend themselves against China's territorial ambitions. But naturally, they look towards whom? India. But natural, they look towards India. Why? Because India had certain common concerns with respect to Chinese aggression. That's one. The second thing is, in Nepal, for example, there is, as we'll see later, there was a tremendous people-to-people contact between India and the Nepali population. Beyond Hinduism also, a large amount of trade and family ties exist between India and Nepal. So there was a certain sort of glue to bind India-Nepal relations already. With Bhutan, we always had good and friendly relations from the time of British India. Mind you, Bhutan and Nepal were not annexed by British. While they imposed treaties on Bhutan and Nepal, the British never annexed Bhutan and Nepal. If you go back and ever read, जो पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है, but मैं broadly बता रहा हूँ. The Treaty of Sogoli, for example, which was signed with Nepal, allowed Nepal to be an independent monarchy under British influence, but still an independent monarchy. The Bhutani monarchy also was by and large under British influence, but was allowed to continue its autonomous rule. Independent India also did not, try to annex these states between 49 to 59. India made no such moves. However, in 1958-59, a number of things happened. One of that thing is the Indian Prime Minister visited Bhutan in 1958. Jawaharlal Nehru took a 3-week-long visit to Bhutan. Back then, there were no major roads, airport, anything. It was largely a trip on foot and horses and all that. It was a very long trip to Bhutan that India made in 1958. In the very next year, 1959, the Chinese aggression in Tibet reached such heights that the objective of the Chinese army or the PLA army was to destroy the Tibetan administration system as it existed and get hold of the Dalai Lama, who was considered the spiritual and the administrative heads of the Tibetans. It is in 1959 that Dalai Lama fled from Lhasa in Tibet on, again, a journey largely on foot and horses, coming through where? Tawang. Coming through Tawang into India. He sought a refuge in India. India granted a political refuge to the Dalai Lama. And this shifted public opinion where? In Bhutan, largely in favor of India. Because China was seen as persecuting the Tibetan Buddhists. India provided refuge to the Dalai Lama, the spiritual head of Buddhists. And thus, Bhutan, with a large Buddhist population, had all the reasons to what? To tilt towards India. So all of this happening in very quick succession, 1958-59. And thereafter, the India-Bhutan relationship went on a very positive trajectory. And to this day, we say that in South Asia, if there is one country with which India shares extremely good relations, the answer is Bhutan. In fact, India says to all the South Asian countries, the India-Bhutan relationship is a model relationship. And we want to replicate such a relationship with all our neighbors. Okay. So it's a broad story जो मैंने आपको एक थोड़ा सा historical context दिया है. This context is a bit important to understand. Now, see, when we cover this topic, और आप ऐसा कोई भी topic cover करें, whenever you're covering any bilateral topic, it's always better. It's always better that you try and divide, say, even the India-Bhutan relationship into certain broad topics that you should cover. The importance of Bhutan to India, or the importance of Bhutan to India, which is or of India-Bhutan relations, often the angle of geostrategic dimensions come into such a picture, or geo-economic also, but here geostrategic dimension comes into the picture. Why India-Bhutan relationship is important? Before you study a relationship, you should have a broad idea about why that relationship is important. Because when you write an answer, you should be able to, in the introduction to the answer, what you should be able to do is actually, what you should be able to do in the beginning of the answer is to talk, for example, the question is on, discuss the issues and challenges in the India-Bhutan relationship. Okay. Specifically in the light of increasing Chinese presence in South Asia. So before discussing the specific challenges in the India-Bhutan relationship, in the first 3 or 4 lines, you should point out to the examiner why this relationship is important. It's sort of an introduction also, okay, as to why that relationship is important. And it is because the relationship is important that addressing its issues and challenges also becomes important, right? Next is what you should have is a brief historical understanding or a brief historical context. Then what you should know is about the strengths and the challenges. The strengths and the challenges of the India-Bhutan relationship. And the fourth is about what is a possible way forward. ये ही 3 या 4 कैटेगरीज आपको हमेशा पढ़नी होती है, ठीक है, टू द एक्सटेंट पॉसिबल, ऑलमोस्ट इन ऑल बायलैटरल टॉपिक्स. इंडिया यूएस भी more or less similar categories. India China more or less similar categories. Okay, so India Afghanistan more or less similar categories. So you should always have a framework. देखिए मैं आपको बता दूं, कोचिंग में आने का एक जो प्राइमरी पर्पस होना चाहिए is that you should know what areas to focus on. Okay, and how to approach reading a certain topic. Suppose you were to read a topic on your own, say India Central Asia, hypothetically you were to read on your own, तो इतना ही पढ़ना है, इतना आपके पास है, so that is enough. There is no need to read a book. There is no need to read 10 chapters on any of this. Let's come to the importance of Bhutan. Now, when I use the word geostrategic, strategic refers to defense or security. of the country, which is often taking a long-term view. Which is often taking a long-term view, not a short-term view. जब short-term की बात होती है, तो we often call it something which is tactical. Long-term में, whenever we talk, it is strategic. देखिए तो technically speaking, in the language of international relations text, when we say that India and US have a strategic relationship, we are indirectly trying to say that from the long-term defense and security needs of the country, this relationship is important. Okay. However, the term strategic today has been used, misused, and abused so commonly that today India has strategic partnerships with more than 50 countries. And the term is so commonly used that partly the term has lost meaning. देखिए आप बोलें कि तुम मेरे बहुत अच्छे दोस्त हो, मेरी सिक्योरिटी के लिए, और in the interest of our mutual security, our relationship is very important. But the same agreement is signed with 50 other countries. What that means is that often this term is being very liberally or very casually used today. However, in the context of really strategic relationships, the India-US relationship, for example, is a relationship that we look at. That from the long-term security point of view of India, the India-US relationship is important because it may play a very vital role in balancing against China. Right? So that is there. Now, when you look, so that is where the word strategic comes. Geography, but that the long term, from the long term security interests of India, along with the overlap of the geographical elements. What are the geographical elements? Geographical elements can be anything. The size of the country, the location of the country. Okay. For example, India is located where? In the Indian Ocean region. And USA is located in the Pacific Ocean region. USA comes from Pacific, India comes from Indian Ocean region. We can have collaboration in the maritime domain. So, in the maritime domain, India and US can work together from the long-term security interest of balancing against China. तो पहले तो मैंने बोला strategic, where I'm just saying that okay, from security interests, India and US can work together. But then I'm overlapping it with the element of geography. Then comes the term geostrategic. Do you get this point? That geostrategic thus means how does the element of geography, whether it is the size of the country, the resources of the country, the location of the country, overlap with the security interests, and how does that affect the relationship? Broad idea समझ में आ गया आपको, है ना? तो जैसे अब if you were to apply the same idea to Bhutan, then you all have heard about what? The Siliguri corridor. And if I was to show you the actual map, this handout will be provided to you. Right? If you look at this map itself, where is this Siliguri corridor? Right? This is the Siliguri corridor, right? And this Siliguri corridor basically is at the narrowest point, some 30 kilometers wide. And it is this is called as the Siliguri corridor, the chicken's neck, which connects the rest of Northeast India to mainland India. Almost all of India's road and railways connecting mainland India to Northeast India pass through the Siliguri corridor. Now, this Siliguri corridor is situated south of what is called as the Chumbi Valley, which is called the Chumbi Valley. Valley is between two mountains. There are mountain ranges here and here. Okay. So basically in Sikkim, between Sikkim and Bhutan, north of Sikkim and Bhutan is Tibetan China, and this is the tri-junction area. The junction between whom? India, Bhutan, and China. What is that tri-junction area? This. This is the tri-junction area, right? Between India, China, and Bhutan. Sikkim is a part of India now. So you understand, Sikkim becoming a part of India is such a big deal. If Sikkim would not have become a part of India, things would have looked very different. Okay. So now, चलिए छोड़िए अभी आप सिक्किम को, कौन पूछ रहा है, कोई नहीं पूछे. By the way, China did not recognize Sikkim as a part of India. Sikkim became a part of India after 1972. By 1975 formally, completely. But China did not recognize Sikkim as a part of India till 2002. It is only in 2002 that China recognized Sikkim as a part of India. Okay. So, but forget all of that. So this is what is the Chumbi Valley region at the Chai junction of China, Bhutan, and the rest of India. And the Chumbi Valley is located immediately north of where? The Siliguri corridor. Now coming to the geostrategic significance of Bhutan. Bhutan's geostrategic significance to India. Why Bhutan is geographically and security interest point of view important to India is because Bhutan is located in proximity to the Siliguri corridor and the tri-junction area. And the tri-junction area, which is currently disputed between whom? China and Bhutan. China and Bhutan. It is in this tri-junction area that what is located? The Doklam Strangely, no more movies made on Doklam Plateau. Much masala is there for Doklam Plateau movie also. And basically, this Doklam Plateau is located here in the tri-junction area, which is a disputed territory as of now between China and Bhutan. China claims it as its own, whereas Bhutan claims it as its own. The Chinese claims are relatively weak in the region, but nonetheless, China is very adamant, or should we say very keen on claiming control of the Doklam region. And this is a matter of concern for India, because if Chinese troops are placed in the Doklam region, if the Chinese troops have a long-term presence in the Doklam region, it is a matter of concern for India, because it almost seems that this region is like a dagger pointed at this chicken's neck. And in case of a larger conflict between whom? India and China. Suppose in Aksai Chin there is a fighting going on, and the Chinese start losing ground in Aksai Chin, say, which is very important for them. Okay. Why Aksai Chin is very important, I'll explain that also briefly in a minute. But if the Chinese start losing territories in the Aksai Chin region to India, hypothetically speaking, then there is India's concern is that China will come in, will open another front through the Doklam region. And through the Doklam region, the Chinese troops will enter and cut off the Siliguri corridor and the rest of northeast India from mainland India. So by coming in quickly, it's merely 30 kilometers. Okay, you can cover it in one day. Ek din, bas. ठीक है. One day is enough for covering 30 kilometers. Okay, the terrain is flat here. You can quickly move in if they are present where? In the Doklam region. So if Bhutan gives up its claims and says China le lo Doklam, then it's a security risk for India. The geostrategic significance of Bhutan to India. That's the most important geographical reason why India does not want Bhutan. India does not want that Bhutan must give up claims on Doklam vis-a-vis China. That's one. Second, the second is not that big, but एक broadly फिर भी बता रहा हूं मैं आपको. The second is that in the past, when Ulfa was active in Assam, the Ulfa insurgents would often cross off the border and go into Bhutan to escape what? To escape any kind of law and order controlling measures from the Indian army or the policing apparatus in Assam. Okay, because once they would cross into Bhutan, the Indian troops could not operate or police could not operate in Bhutanese territory. And so insurgents would try to make a safe haven for themselves in Bhutan. Now in 2003, Bhutan launched an operation All Clear in coordination with the Indian government and helped the Indian government track down and ensure that Ulfa insurgents do not cross into Bhutan anymore. So even in the area of cross border, even in the area of tackling insurgency in Northeast, be careful, I'm never using the word terrorism in Northeast. ना आप कहीं पढ़ेंगे, कहीं नहीं पढ़ेंगे लिखा हुआ कि there is terrorism in Northeast. The word used is insurgency in Northeast. ठीक है, तो आपको पता होना चाहिए to tackle terrorism in Northeast. There is no terrorism in Northeast. It's insurgency. Okay. So it is in this context, the insurgency in Northeast, for tackling that also Bhutan's cooperation has been useful in the past and can also play an important role possibly in the future also. Okay. So that's why from India's security concerns point of view, Bhutan is an important state, and that is largely owing to its location, which is close to the Siliguri corridor or the chicken's neck. Now let's flip it. Why India is important for Bhutan? Part of the answer I told you. India is important for Bhutan from geostrategic perspective. One is that, what is that? That India is possibly the only strong player in the region which has common concerns vis-a-vis China's territorial aggression, or India shares some of the same concerns vis-a-vis Chinese territorial aggressions with Bhutan, and that is one common point of convergence. Secondly, for Bhutan, India is extremely important because Bhutan is located south of the Himalayas, and for its access to sea and ensuring its independent trade and activities, relations with India, good relations with India are important. Bhutan cannot afford to have hostile relations with whom? India, given that they are a landlocked country and they're dependent upon India for access to sea. So these are reasons why Bhutan has all the reasons to have good relations with India. So ये तो importance है broad level पे of both to each other. You can write down with me. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, so in terms of India, Bhutan, in terms of whom? India, Bhutan relationship, the importance of India-Bhutan relationship, you can write. The geographical location of Bhutan in close proximity to the Siliguri corridor and the Tri-Junction region between India, China, and Bhutan makes it an important partner of India, given India's long-term security, or strategic concerns vis-a-vis China. Strong strong or good India-Bhutan relations are vital strong India-Bhutan relations are vital to ensure that Bhutan does not cede or give away, CEDE, does not cede the Doklam Plateau region to China, which could pose security concerns to India's interests in the region. What you're asking is, sir, how could China use Doklam against India? Is what I was trying to tell you is this. Let me show you the other map, which I've also given here only. Here, right? That if the Chinese troops are already in the Chumbi Valley region, which they are not currently, then they can, in the event of a larger conflict between India and China, the Chinese troops can simply walk over and take over the control of the whole Siliguri corridor, disrupting India's what? Territorial contiguity of mainland India with the rest of Northeast India. So if the Chinese troops do come in, in large numbers very quickly, for them to come in quickly, they need to be present here. Only then they can come in. Mind you, the government of India also, it's not that don't have our own counter plans. We have our own counter plans also. That the Chinese are already, because ऐसा नहीं है कि the Chinese will come into Doklam, the Chinese are in Doklam. Someone like, नहीं sir, आप लोगों जैसे लोगों की यही problem है. You only tell half truth. For full truth, we have to watch movies. Okay. So the half truth is that the Chinese troops were present in Doklam till 2017. Then Indian troops also entered into Doklam. There was a 73 days standoff to be more precise, following which the Chinese troops withdrew from Doklam. Now, this was a statement made by the late Indian Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj in the Indian Parliament, that the Chinese troops withdrew from Doklam and Indian troops also withdrew from Doklam. 10 days later, the Indian Express carried a report of US satellite imagery showing that the Chinese troops had withdrawn from Doklam 100 meters. So the Indian statement made in the parliament was not incorrect, because the Chinese troops did withdraw from Doklam. The foreign minister did not say how many meters. And the fact of the matter remains, the Chinese troops are present in Doklam. And so are the Indian troops also present, sitting here on the exact, ab itna detail hamare liye nahi zarurat hai. They are sitting here very close to the K2 mountain range along the Sikkim border, and also they are present in Bhutan along the western side. There is the Indian Military Training Center in Bhutan on the northwestern side of Bhutan, where 1,000 Indian troops are permanently positioned. In the event of the Chinese troops quickly mobilizing from here, the Indian troops plan to mobilize counter from end to end and close off the Chinese. Okay, now this all हमको नहीं, आपको नहीं लड़ना है जाके, ना हमको लड़ना है. All we need to know is that this is an extremely volatile and important area, primarily because of its proximity to the Siliguri corridor. Okay, and that is all. जो आप समझिए इतना बहुत है. Now, coming back here, you can write down further that given pose security concerns to Indians' interests in the region, to ward off a possible Chinese aggression in the Siliguri corridor, to ward off a possible Chinese aggression in the Siliguri corridor or the chicken's neck, in case of a larger border conflict between whom? Between India and China, the India-Bhutan relationship will become extremely important to support Indian positions in the region. देखिए, मेरे पास एक बार जीवन में बहुत समय था, मैंने 3 महीने बैठ के सिर्फ इंडिया भूटान ही पढ़ा, लेकिन आपके पास ना समय है ना कोई पूछेगा. ठीक है, तो इट्स अ कंट्री ऑफ 7,50,000 पीपल. इतना तो हम वेस्ट दिल्ली, नॉर्थ दिल्ली, ईस्ट दिल्ली में ही कर लेते. क्या है मतलब, भूटान तो, but they are very nice people. Only 6 people died in Bhutan from COVID. They are still continuing quarantine. Okay, 6 people, sir, 6 people died out of 7,50,000 people. Even if you apply that, it's a very small country with a very small population, but 6 is an extremely small number for number of people to die. So, koi nahi. But that is their official statistics. Even if you can't discount it that 20 times under reporting bhi maan lo, to bhi 120 people only died. Right? So it's a very small number. This is a country with, जो आप बोलते हैं कौन सा happiness index, top में खेलते हैं वो, है ना? But apparently, so whatever. Now, it's a unique country in many aspects. So, to ward off a possible Chinese aggression, in the case of larger, the India-Bhutan relationship will become extremely important to support Indian position in the region. That's why this relationship is important. Simultaneously, and let me explain this. Simultaneously, For Bhutan to defend its territorial integrity, for Bhutan to defend its territorial integrity vis-a-vis China, a strong relationship with India becomes important. A strong relationship with India becomes important. Strong relationship with India becomes important. As both share similar concerns with respect to Chinese aggression. Moreover, left alone, Bhutan is structurally in a weaker position vis-a-vis China to defend itself on its own, and thus would require to pursue closer relations with whom? India, to balance against Chinese aggression. Baki, that landlocked nature and all of that is there. Now, if this is one of the reasons why the first visit of independent India's first Prime Minister, India attained independence in 2014. Independent India's first Prime Minister's first visit was to which country? Bhutan. 5 years after independence, in 2019, India's foreign minister's first visit was to which country? Bhutan. Bhutan has made it a point that every time a new prime minister is appointed in Bhutan, their first visit is to which country? India. The only country in South Asia which has not established full diplomatic relations with whom? China, or the only country in South Asia where China does not have an embassy is Bhutan. So Bhutan over decades has clearly preferred to work closely with whom? India. And to that extent, India has also sought to reciprocate what? To Bhutan in terms of cooperation in all areas. Whether it is infrastructure development, to energy, to many other areas. So that is why this relationship is an extremely important relationship. From the time of 1961, when Bhutan adopted its first 5-year plan, to the 12th 5-year plan currently, India has provided in every 5-year plan of Bhutan developmental assistance. Okay. So basically, as we'll see, India has consistently invested in the Bhutan relationship, and which has been also been reciprocated by the Bhutanese side. Now, so this is there. Now let me give you a brief historical context. 1949, CPC, the Communist Party of China, came to power. In China and announced what? The One China, what? Announced the One China policy, under which Tibet was considered to be an integral part of China. Now, in fact, after 1949, between 1949 to 1953, the Chinese troops were slowly but steadily sent into Tibet. Okay. In the same year, 1949, or in fact, very quickly after 1949, we see what? That a friendship treaty was signed between whom? India and Bhutan. As the Chinese made what? Very clear their intentions of what? Consolidating their hold over whom? Bhutan, over Tibet. India and Bhutan signed a friendship treaty. And this is a very important friendship treaty of 1949. ये treaty revised हुई थी 2007 में. Okay, but this friendship treaty was signed in 1949. Mind you, this friendship treaty came on the back of British India's relations to Bhutan. And during the British India period, Bhutan was a monarchy, which was largely independent to govern its internal affairs. Okay. However, on foreign policy, etc., it was to be guided by British India. Now, when India attained independence, India inherited partly its foreign policy from whom? British. Okay. And as a partly driven by that foreign policy, the historical aspect, and also partly driven by India's concerns with respect to China, independent India signed a new treaty with Bhutan, that is the friendship treaty. And under this treaty, there were two articles. There were two main articles, Article 1 and Article 2. देखिए, under Article 1, it was said that when it came to the domestic affairs of whom? Bhutan, the Bhutanese monarchy would enjoy complete autonomy. So, to decide their domestic affairs, the Bhutanese monarchy will enjoy complete autonomy. But Article 2 of the treaty said that as far as foreign policy is concerned, Bhutan will be guided by India. Okay. So they clearly said it where? In a treaty. In this treaty, that with respect to foreign policy or relations, with respect to foreign policy or relations with other countries, Bhutan will be guided by whom? Will be guided or would be guided by India. India was like the elder brother. Okay. And the elder brother would guide the younger brother as far as foreign policy matters were concerned. This became the basis of the India-Bhutan Friendship Treaty. By the way, if India is the elder brother and Bhutan is the younger brother, and if younger brother is going to be guided by the elder brother must also take care of the younger brother, which is not just in security sphere, but also in the developmental sphere. Now, please understand, India's ability to provide aid, developmental aid of any sort in the early 1950s was going to be extremely limited. Limited by what? Limited by India's own developmental needs. The Indian economy, or so as to say, both of the Chinese and the Indian economy were placed very similar to each other in 1949. In terms of literacy, India's literacy was less than 20%. So was that of the Chinese. Both dealt with poverty, high poverty, low literacy, low food security, okay, and similar developmental challenges for both India and China. If you have your own developmental challenges, then your ability to provide aid and assistance to other countries is going to be extremely limited. Right? Only when you have seizable economic reserves and only when you have seizable economic reserves can you actually play an important role of providing aid and assistance to any country. So, but the understanding was implicit that as and when possible, India will play such a role. Okay. Now, it is in this context that this was to begin with, this friendship treaty was signed, and this has been the guiding document or a guiding document of the relationship, of the India-Bhutan relationship. Now, if you see, by 1953, the Chinese troops moved in where? Troops moved into Tibet. In 1954, India and China signed what was called as the Panchsheel Agreement, was signed between India and China. ये मैं इसलिए भी बता रहा हूं क्योंकि ये by and large all this will apply to whom? India and Nepal also. India and Nepal also signed a friendship treaty when? In 1950. 1949 में Bhutan signed, 1950 में Nepal signed. All of this is happening, you know, what is happening with Bhutan and what is happening with Nepal are largely governed by the same set of events. So a Panchsheel agreement is signed between India and China. The Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and the Chinese Prime Minister at this time Zhou Enlai. Okay, they signed the Panchsheel agreement, which you will study in the India-China relationship also in more detail, are the set of 5 governing principles. And under these 5 governing principles, one, or if I was to say only emphasize 2 or 3 of the important ones as of now, is that one principle was that both countries will conduct with relations with each other on the basis of, firstly, equality, would respect each other's sovereignty, and also would also respect territorial integrity and also, if I was to say, would resolve any issues in a peaceful or resolve any outstanding issues through peaceful methods or talks and negotiations or through non-violent measures. Resolve issues through peaceful or non-violent measures. The idea, the principle of equality would say that both countries, while dealing with each other, would treat each other as equals. Okay, so both are going to talk to each other or are going to negotiate with each other on the basis of equality, that no one side is superior to the other, nor would one respect each other's sovereignty. Meaning, इसी का था नॉन इंटरफेरेंस इन द डोमेस्टिक अफेयर्स ऑफ non-interference where in the domestic affairs of, let me just explain first, non-interference in the domestic affairs of each other, meaning that firstly you would conduct relations on the basis of equality. The second is the principle of sovereignty. The principle of sovereignty is very simple in saying that in a particular state, the government of the state is the supreme authority, and we as a country or India as a country will not interfere in the domestic affairs of China. Read as what? India will not interfere in the domestic affairs of China, meaning what China does in Tibet. यही तो हुआ. आपको क्या लग रहा है, मतलब हवा में साइन हो रहा है कुछ? देखिए, जो लिखा जाता है, the text carries a meaning in a certain context. The text read blindly means nothing. The context defines the meaning of the text. And this is really hard for us to understand because we expect text to carry meaning automatically. जब भी हम पढ़ते हैं, the problem with studying social sciences is this, that text, the same word secularism can mean 10 different things in 10 different context, which is unlike physical sciences, jahan gravity means only one thing in whichever context. Gravitational force is G m1 m2 upon r square. ठीक है. V is equal to U plus AT. Newton's first law of motion context dependent नहीं है, but social sciences is context dependent. So the text here is saying non-interference in the domestic affairs. We are saying that we will not interfere where? In the internal affairs of China. Meaning China's concern is what? China's unsaid concern is that if the Tibetan, and if you have seen the movie, if you go ahead and see the movies, 7 Years in Tibet also, China's concern partly is this, that if Chinese troops move into Tibet and take control of Tibet, the Tibetan population may be supplied arms by whom? India or India and US, and the Tibetan people may pick up arms against the Chinese state and there may be a prolonged insurgency. What if India recognizes an independent government of Tibet and provides arms and support to the Tibetan government to fight against Chinese? Non-interference in the domestic affairs of each other. That is the concern of whom? The Chinese. And this was not a wild idea that could not have been possible. It was within the realm of possibility. In fact, in the context of 1962 India-China war, we'll see that part of this was almost close to becoming a reality. There was also the concern that in the context of the Cold War, India can tilt towards USA and provide CIA operating bases to fuel insurgency in Tibet against China. So China is like non-interference. We're like, okay, non-interference. Respect each other's territorial integrity. Now, this is a nonsense statement to make, primarily because the border itself was undefined. Both sides said we will respect each other's territorial integrity, but without having a clear definition of where of territorial demarcation of boundaries. Okay, we'll see when 1962 war happened, India accused China of violating the Panchsheel because the Chinese walked into Aksai Chin. India said you are not respecting our territorial integrity. China said that's our territory. That's one. Secondly, China counter-accused India of also violating the Panchsheel agreement, saying India had violated the core principle of Panchsheel agreement, Panchsheel agreement by violating the principle of non-interference in the domestic affairs of China. How? The biggest evidence was to give refuge to the Dalai Lama. Now, India's argument was that the Dalai Lama is being given refuge because he is just like any other refugee who's seeking refuge in India because he fears a threat to his life in China, and we follow an open policy towards refugees. So he is being given a refuge. And while he is in India, he will not be allowed to do any political activity in India. His status will only be that of a refugee and also as a spiritual leader of Buddhists. But the reality also was this, that he was also the political head of the Tibetan state. Okay. So the Chinese accused India of violating the principle of Panchsheel in 1959. The Indians accused the Chinese of violating the principle in 1962. Who's watching all of this? Bhutan, Nepal. They're like, their worst nightmare is that they become the playgrounds for an India-China war. What is happening in Ukraine is that Ukraine may become a playground for the larger conflict between NATO and small states sandwiched between big states often have such concerns. Okay, so this is that context. Once you start appreciating their dilemma, then you only understand the significance of the relationship. Otherwise, अरे सर इसका क्या करना है, भूटान इतना सही तो है, नेपाल इतना सही तो है, right? So there is a reason that the Nepali soldiers, the Gorkha regiment, serves in the Indian army. India wants these countries to have good relations with India, and India is willing to go the extra mile. India has an open border with whom? Nepal. You can walk into Nepal without having a passport. आधार वाधार लेके चले जाओ, ठीक है, वो बन जाता है वैसे भी, फोटो लगाने का, चिपका देने का, नीचे कुछ भी हो. Commonly, Indians feel that Aadhaar is an identity proof. Government of India's official document says Aadhaar is not an identity proof. आप पढ़ लीजिए जाके. Technically, it is not an identity proof. It is not a proof of citizenship. ये तो आपको पता ही होगा. Aadhaar is not a proof of citizenship. It is not an address proof, though it is commonly accepted as an address proof. It is not an identity proof also. What proof it is of, I have failed to understand over years. Aadhaar Files, another movie can be made. Suggesting new ideas for potential movie makers amongst you. Coming back here, so the Panchsheel, technically what Aadhaar is a method that the government has devised primarily to ensure cash transfers to the people for any welfare schemes that the government may wish to implement, and to ensure that there are no leakages in terms of transferring money. So once I have identified you as an individual who needs to be given, say, 5,000 rupees as a cash transfer, I take your Aadhaar, I cross-verify and ensure that the money reaches your account. That is the purpose that Aadhaar serves, targeted subsidy delivery to beneficiaries. DBT, direct benefit transfer. JAM भी चल रहा था बीच में कुछ.
कुछ कुछ चल रहा था, मैं तो भूल गया एक्रोनिम का मतलब. Indians are good at inventing acronyms, but that is the purpose Aadhaar serves. The purpose that Indians think Aadhaar serves, it doesn't. चलिए छोड़िए. Now let's come back here on this Panchsheel agreement. In terms of, so this agreement was signed in 54, 58. क्योंकि देखिए ये तो पहले ही पता चल गया था by 58 itself that the Chinese are doing road building in Aksai Chan. In 1958, Indian intelligence agencies had found enough evidence that the Chinese were doing road building in Aksai Chan. The same year, as I told you, the Indian Prime Minister paid a visit to Bhutan, and following that visit, it was decided that from Bagdogra, which is in India, from Bagdogra in India, linking all the way to Paro, and which is the capital of Bhutan, a highway would be constructed. And this is a big, big deal. Because before this, there was no highway. Connecting whom? India to Bhutan. And there was no highway connecting either India to Bhutan or China to Bhutan. But the Bhutanese side, in 1958, gave the permission, following Jawaharlal Nehru's visit, to construct almost a 250-kilometer long highway connecting India to Bhutan. Why is that a big deal? Because now Indian troops can enter into Bhutan quickly if there is a conflict. Okay, and a decision was made at the highest level. The Bhutanese monarchy went ahead and gave this permission, which was an indirect signal that Bhutan is tilting towards whom? India. Otherwise, they would have not given such a permission. They did not give such a permission to the Chinese side anyways. Okay, so following this, there is a highway construction. $250 long, linking to Paro, which would allow troop mobilization. Which would allow rapid troop mobilization from India to Bhutan. Okay. Then 1959 is Dalai Lama fled to India and sought refuge. The public opinion in Bhutan shifted further in favor of closer relations with India. But 1962, what happened? India-China war. Who defeated whom? China defeated India. And China defeated India in the 1962 war, which is a matter of concern for whom? India. But a bigger matter of concern for whom? Bhutan. Because it seems that Bhutan has placed its bets on the wrong horse. You have to understand that what is happening in Doklam is being watched very close. What happened in Doklam to currently what is happening in the Aksai Chan region. What is happening in the Aksai Chan region currently since the last year's standoff is being watched closely by whom? Nepal and Bhutan. If Bhutan makes an assessment that India is unable to defend its own territories, then it is going to clearly not depend on India vis-a-vis China. Okay. So what is happening? So whatever is happening in the Pangong region to the death of Indian soldiers and the Chinese soldiers in the standoff, and both sides are still what the troops are still placed stationed in the region and they are yet to disengage, as to say, in the Aksai region. So whatever happens there is going to be watched very closely by Bhutan and Nepal. And this, as they did when in 1962. So the India-China war of 1962 and India's defeat was a matter of concern for Bhutan. But then, to settle matters, happened the 1965 war. ठीक है, 1965 war, which is the India-Pakistan war. And then there was the 1971 war, which is the, again, the India-Pakistan war or the India-Bangladesh or the Bangladesh Liberation War or the India-Pakistan war. In both these wars, 65 war, who won? It is more of a stalemate, but definitely Pakistan did not win in terms of gaining any new territories vis-a-vis India. Okay, or India successfully warded off the Pakistani attempted aggression of the 1965 war. And in 1971, India served as the midwife for the birth of Bangladesh. And it is in this context, by the way, that in 1963, as why I am telling you all of this is क्योंकि ये broadly will help you even in the other places. हर जगह it will help you. This timeline broadly. 1963, because once this is clear, then I don't have to spend too much time on Nepal. Nepal पे सीधे सीधे बात करेंगे. That in 1963, China and whom? Pakistan. China and Pakistan settled their border. When? In 1963. They settled their border where the Saksham Valley, SAK, SHAM, the Saksham Valley. This is in the north of the Karakoram range, north of Siachen, समझ लीजिए. North of Siachen is the Saksham Valley. This region was given by Pakistan to China. Both sides signed a border agreement and settled their border and became good friends, so as to say. And so the China-Pakistan relationship started improving after 63. There is the 65 China war, India-Pakistan war, and the 71. In both these wars, while there was pressure from China also on India, but India was successful in terms of not allowing what? ये बस समझ लीजिए, लिखना नहीं है. अरे ऐसे समझ लीजिए. 71 war, did China intervene in favor of Pakistan? No. China did not intervene explicitly in favor of Pakistan. Okay. Nor did it do in 65. However, a constant concern has been that the Chinese troops can build pressure, and in 71, documents show that the Chinese were willing to put some pressure on India by saying that they will move troops into Doklam. 71 maybe. So it's not a new story, it's a story for a long time, though they did not. And India made a very quick intervention in Bangladesh, which lasted for almost around 3 weeks and completed the military intervention in Bangladesh. Okay. So that is there, and it was a decisive intervention. So not much happened. But the long and short of this is the 65 and 71 victories of India reclaimed India's status in South Asia. इज्जत वापस आ गई. And the smaller South Asian nations could now believe that, okay, India has done its bit to upgrade its military muscle and respond in military or respond through the use of hard power as and when needed. And the possibility of Chinese intervention has also not deterred India. This is a matter of some relief for whom? Bhutan. And to now strengthen the relationship with whom? Bhutan. India 1961 onwards started what? Deepening economic cooperation and developmental cooperation with whom? Bhutan. Okay. So 1961 onwards, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि सर 65 के बाद 61 कैसे लिख सकते हैं, अपनी कॉपी है, कैसे भी लिख सकते हैं, राइट. So in 1961 onwards, India and Bhutan moved towards deepening, developmental what? Cooperation. How? देखिए, there was under, देखिए, after the 1962 war, India made an organization by the name of BRO, Border Roads Organization. 62 war tak border did not have roads, and India did not have the ability to quickly mobilize troops to its frontier areas to provide them food, fuel supplies in case of a prolonged conflict. To speed up border infrastructure construction, the BRO was formed after the 62 war. And the BRO was one of the earliest tasks that the BRO was given was under Project Dantak to upgrade border infrastructure of roads and highways in India's border areas. It is under Project Dantak also that between 1961 till 2000s, India has constructed almost more than 1500 kilometers of roads and highways. Where? In Bhutan. Of roads and highways where? In Bhutan. Including the construction of the Paro airport is also done by India. Including the construction of their administrative wing of the Parliament House, etc., has also been done by India. So India's invested a lot in the construction of the roads and highways. Part of that helps also India to quickly mobilize troops into Bhutan in case of a conflict. Secondly, even in area of what? Deepening military cooperation, in terms of security cooperation, also what India has done is that is the, in terms of security cooperation, what India has done is there is the IMTRAT, IMTRAT, the Indian Military Training Academy, where? In Bhutan. And under the Indian Military Training Academy in Bhutan, Indian Military Training Academy in Bhutan, India firstly stations 1,000 troops, and the ITRAT training center is located in northwest Bhutan. 1,000 Indian troops are stationed, and they also provide training to the Royal Bhutanese Army. So these are firstly two things: security cooperation and infrastructure. Next, coming where economic cooperation. This I am also indirectly telling you what the strengths of the India-Bhutan relationship. These are some of the strengths of the India-Bhutan relationship. That the next is where in the economic arena, and the economic arena is an extremely important one. Firstly, economic arena mein, do Nepali people come to work in India in large numbers? Yes. What about Bhutani population? Do they come to work in India in large numbers? Yes or no? No, they don't come to work in India. Why don't they come to work in India? Because India doesn't offer the kind of opportunities that the Bhutani folks require as far as employment is concerned. Whereas that's not the case in Nepal. The Nepali folks come to India seeking employment opportunities in large numbers. What that tells you is that Bhutan is not looking towards India to provide employment to its people. But Bhutan does look towards India, primarily we'll see in the area of hydropower exports. Bhutan's economy is largely based on two things. One is the export of hydropower. The second is on the export of, or the second is on tourism. Bhutan's constitution says that 75% of Bhutan must always remain under forest cover. They have written it in their constitution that 75% of Bhutan must remain in forest cover. What that means is that Bhutan is not looking to go manufacturing-led economic growth. Bhutan is not looking to export its workers elsewhere, finding employment and all that. ये है ही नहीं उनका economic planning or policy. Okay. And Bhutan is very big on environmental conservation. You may have read or heard, Bhutan is one of the few countries in the world which is a carbon negative country. It absorbs more carbon than it emits. Okay. So, and many other things are unique about Bhutan. Long and short of this is that when it comes to economic cooperation, Bhutan's economy is largely driven by the export of hydropower and secondly, tourism. In both of them, their number one partner is whom? India. Okay. And thus, economically, both are very closely intertwined. So, in terms of economic cooperation, almost 14% of Bhutan's GDP comes from their economic transactions with, comes from their economic relations or transactions with India. Come from their economic transactions with India. Almost 80 to 90% of their exports go to which country? India. And almost 70% of their imports also come from India. Now, firstly, since 1961, I'll come to the economic relationship in some more depth later. But since 1961, India has been providing developmental assistance to Bhutan's 5-year plans, including the 12th 5-year plan, which was adopted in 2018, for which India has allocated 5,000 crore rupees. The Indian currency is accepted in Bhutan. Okay? The Indian currency is accepted in Bhutan, and we have a rupee mechanism of exchange with Bhutan. Okay, so basically India's provided some 5,000 crore financial assistance for Bhutan's 5-year plans. Mind you, this is not a loan. This is a aid or assistance. But as I said, there are no free lunches in the world. And ऐसा नहीं 5,000 crore रुपए ऐसे बांट रहे हैं हम. Like you may raise the objection saying, sir, why are we giving 5,000 crores to Bhutan when there are so many poor people in India? This is the same nonsense argument which people make. Why are we sending a space mission to Moon or Mars, where people are dying of poverty in India? Sir, India's space mission ultimately helps in India's poverty alleviation only. How? ये क्वेश्चन आया हुआ है, ऐसा नहीं है. देखिए मैं आपको एक चीज बता दूं, यहां मैं क्लास में बैठ के बकैती नहीं कर रहा हूं. जो मैं बोल रहा हूं या तो पूछा गया है या पूछा जाएगा. The significance of India's space mission is that India's space mission, for example, the New York Times carried this cartoon. When the GSLV program was successful recently, आप पढ़ेंगे होता है PSLV, एक होता है GSLV, है ना. एक होता है पोलर सैटेलाइट लॉन्च व्हीकल, एक होता है जियो स्टेशनरी सैटेलाइट लॉन्च व्हीकल, है ना. सिंपल भाषा में एक बड़ी सैटेलाइट ले आता है, एक छोटी. ठीक है. Now, India registered a success in GSLV missions, becoming one of the few countries in the world which can actually launch high weight satellites at 35,000 kilometers orbit, which is a capability that only few countries in the world have. The New York Times carried a cartoon, and in that cartoon showed that on the one side India is investing in, and you can Google this, you'll find that cartoon. That India is investing in space mission and sending rockets and celebrating its success in the space mission programs. Whereas on the other side, there are Indians who are poor and malnourished and weak. And many people said that this shows what is wrong with India's planning. Now, the counter to this, and this is a very good point that you should understand, that India's success of the space mission programs has contributed greatly to India's development for a variety of reasons. One is, as the current Prime Minister said in eloquent terms, where India successfully completed the Mars mission, was that car runs at 14 rupees a kilometer, 14 rupees a kilometer. India's space mission, Mars mission, was completed at 9 rupees per kilometer. This is on record explanation by the Indian Prime Minister to explain the magnanimity of the success of India's Mars mission, that it was completed in a very small cost of 250 crore rupees. But he gave this explanation because common Indians understand mileage. He is an excellent communicator. He knows how to hit people in language they understand. But what it denoted was India completed the space mission in 250 crores, which is a nominal amount of movie. It is the budget of the movie Gravity. इतने में तो मूवी बनाई थी उन्होंने, उतने में तो हमने भेज दिया मार्स पे रोवर. What it demonstrated was India's competence of launching space missions, which would make India a potential, currently also and in the future also, a potential partner where through whom third countries can send their satellites into space, earning India what? Foreign exchange revenue. That's one. Secondly, using this PSLV and GSLV, earlier for launching our own big satellites, we had to go to France and pay them to launch these satellites. Now we would save money on that also. Thirdly, by launching these satellites, India could do what? A better observation of the changing weather patterns within India, which could be used to provide timely information to what? India's farmers, कि भैया बारिश होने वाली है, or how is the weather or the monsoon going to play out in this particular season, which will help the farmers to time their crops better or grow the correct kind of crop depending on the predicted rainfall for this particular year. पढ़ते ना कि this year monsoon is expected to be normal. Who tells you that? India's space mission program and its successes. So, in the words of the movie Swades, Shah Rukh Khan coming back to India, becoming part of ISRO, and ISRO playing a positive developmental role in tackling poverty, in improving the income of Indian farmers. And so the success of India's space program is not divorced from the needs of the Indian economy. ऐसे आप explain कर सकते हैं, ठीक है? तो ऐसे आता है science and inclusive growth. How can science promote inclusive? This is the meaning. बच्चे सर इसमें क्या लिखना है? हाँ? तो बच्चे भैया सर साइंस इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ. This is a good example. What I'm saying is, whenever you read something, try to contextualize it. समझ के पढ़िए. It will always give you content, arguments, etc. to formulate answer. So coming back here, why did I drift apart? Is that spending this 5,000 crore on Bhutan is spending on India's security. This 5,000 crore is being given to Bhutan, partly spending on whom? India's security. Okay. But that's not all. This 5,000 crore also is the money that India is giving to Bhutan to repay India only. I'll explain how. थोड़ा सा complex है. But coming to, so this is one developmental assistance that we are providing them. At the same point of time, in terms of economic cooperation, there comes what? Hydro power cooperation. This is Bhutan's chief revenue and foreign currency exchange earner. What? Hydropower. Bhutan's major export is hydropower. Okay. So, from 1967 onwards, there was the Chukha hydropower project, and if you look, देखिए आप लोगों के लेवल पे इतना ज्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है नहीं. In 2008, India converted or constructed the Tala. India constructed the Tala hydropower project. And now India, as of now, Prime Minister Modi visited Bhutan in the pre-pandemic period in 2019 also, where the Mangdenchu project, which is something around 700 megawatts project, was completed. This is a list of some of those projects which have 67 में Chukha Power project construction started. By 1970s, it was completed, to be more precise. The Tala project was something around, again in the range of something around 1000 megawatts project. Now, Bhutan has rich reserves of freshwater rivers and hydropower potential, which it has exploited or to construct some of these dams. Now, the electricity from these dams is exported to where? India. Bhutan का population is 7.5 लाख है, उनको नहीं चाहिए इतना electricity. They export it largely to whom? India. That's one thing. So India is a market for Bhutanese electricity export. That's one. So this electricity is exported to India. Also exported chiefly to India as of now. Also, in 2019, there are other projects which are currently ongoing, जो बन रहे हैं, this Pungtanshu 1, this Pungtanshu 2, वो details हमारे लिए नहीं important है. There are also 1000 megawatts each project. 1000 megawatt dams are big dams, they're not small dams. Okay. Now, the long and short of this is in 2008, the government of India and Bhutan said that we will pursue closer cooperation in hydropower arena to the extent that the target would be to generate some 20,000 megawatts of hydropower electricity by 2020. Though this target was never achieved. But the target was, the target was this 20,000 megawatts by 2020, roughly, was this target. But this target was never achieved. The question, now, one thing is that India is buying that electricity. But the other thing is, how will the Bhutanese go ahead and construct these dams? Please understand, constructing these kind of dams requires firstly large amount of finances. Secondly, technical know-how. There are not many companies which can do these kind of constructions. Secondly, technical know-how is required, finances is required. You technical know-how, you require engineers, you require companies which can do these kind of constructions. So it is in this context that for the construction of these projects, whether the financing of these projects or for the actual construction of these projects, the Bhutanese have largely relied on whom? India. It is Indian companies like L&T, Larsen & Toubro, or the National Hydropower Corporation of India Limited, who have actually gone ahead and done all these constructions of dams. So, who constructs these dams? Indian companies. So, the Bhutanese have to pay whom for the construction of these dams? Indian companies. Bhutan exports this electricity chiefly to whom? India. So, clearly, there is a dependence of their hydropower sector on India, not just for exporting to India, but also for the construction or maintenance of these projects. Okay. So, for example, for the Chukha project and many other projects initially, in terms of providing financial assistance for the construction of projects, India has been the primary partner. India has been what? The primary partner. So much so that in terms of India was a primary partner, that 60% of what? That 60% of the project cost, in case of many of the early projects, 60% of the project cost was given as 60 to 70% of the project cost was given as aid by India, and 30 to 40%, 60 to 70% was given as aid by India, and 30 to 40% was given as soft loan. $30 to 40% was given as soft loan for these projects. By whom? India to Bhutan. So that's one of the things. And also apart from that, the technical assistance and the execution of these projects was largely done by whom? Was largely carried out by India. Now, basically, the execution of these projects was largely carried out by whom? Indian companies. The maximum number of tourists to Bhutan come from which country? India. Okay. That doesn't mean that Indians are the highest paying tourists who come to Bhutan. They largely come from US and Europe. Okay. But India sends large number of tourists in numbers. Okay. Now, so clearly their economy has a large dependence on whom? India. Okay. Now, this is something which has been the binding factors in the India-Bhutan relationship, the security aspect and the economic aspect. Now, if this is what has been, one could say, I would broadly say, some of the binding factors of the strength of the India-Bhutan relationship. But there are some more strengths of the India-Bhutan relationship that I have not told you right now. That is what I'm telling you next. And that comes back to the security aspect. Okay. How? Let me explain. Coming back to the chronology that we were writing about. तो मैंने आपको बताया ना क्या हुआ 71 तक. Partly Bhutan was reassured that okay, it's okay. India has shown some ability to stand on its feet militarily and defend its interests, meaning it can possibly defend against whom? China as well. ठीक है, India-China relationship anyways had gone for a nosedive after the 62 war. No Indian Prime Minister visited China after the 62 war for a good 27 years up till Rajiv Gandhi's visit. Okay. Indira Gandhi did not go, Jawaharlal Nehru did not go, Shastri did not go. Okay. It is only much later when whom? Rajiv Gandhi paid a visit to China. Now, it is not a coincidence that during all this while that the Bhutanese also did not work towards what? Work towards getting into any major relationship with China. Bhutan, ये जो मैंने आपको बताया इतना सब कर रहा है इंडिया के साथ Bhutan and India are working in so many arenas together. But what is happening in the Bhutan-China relationship? Not much. Okay. And in the 1971 war also, clearly Bhutan was more towards India's side. And you see that going towards 1985, 84, finally the Bhutanese and the Chinese side started talking on the border question. This is closely 85, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi comes to power. 1988, 87, 88, he pays a visit to China. Okay. And it is in the same year of 1988 that the Chinese and the Bhutanese start doing border talks. Coincidence nahi hai. When India goes to China, Bhutan also starts talking to China. It's not a coincidence. And in 1988, what happens is the China-Bhutan border talks. China-Bhutan border talks were started. There is Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China after 1987-88, followed by is in China-Bhutan border talks. What happened or what was talked about? I'll let me broadly tell you this. So, देखिए, the details of this was not very clearly available, but from what we know, is that in the Chumbi Valley region, the Chinese had been making claims since 1950s of what? That the Chumbi Valley or the associated Doklam Plateau belongs to whom? China. But the Bhutanese side countered this, often saying that the grazers from Bhutan would graze their cattle in the Doklam, have been grazing their cattle in the Doklam areas for centuries. And anyways, this is a part of Bhutan. So the Doklam Plateau was a contested territory, if you were to say, between whom? Bhutan and China. But definitely the Bhutanese side argued that their pastoralists from Bhutan who would graze cattle in the Doklam area had been doing so for centuries, and there were no historical claims on the Chinese side to support their claims over Doklam. So the border talks were to talk about settling the border between China and Bhutan. The area of contestation was where? In the Doklam Plateau. Now, however, the talks did not result in any agreement. As of now, there were some claims apparently that now China had started raising after 88 for contested territories, not just in northwest. ये तो northwest है ना, western side of China, of Bhutan है, right? In northwestern Bhutan, if these were claims, there were some concerns that China was now saying that in the same year 1988, China now made some new claims. Where? China made some new claims in northern Bhutan. Where? New claims of something around 450 square kilometers in northern Bhutan. Sorry. And this is some 250 square kilometers of territory. Again, the area, frankly, the details of the areas are not important at our level, but I'll probably just show you the map to kind of tell you what are they up to. If I have that map there, let me see. Okay. Just 1 second. Yes. One second. There's no fire, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so I think there's some internet.
I'm looking for that. Okay. So yeah, so this is that particular map. If you if you look at this particular map, if you look at this particular map, I'll just probably open it here. It tells you that story that you broadly need to know. Kyunki this is playing out right now. What happened there is playing out now in the relationship. If you look at this map, what this tells you is the Doklam Plateau region here, right? That I told you, some 250 square kilometers of contested territory. Now, up till 1988, the Chinese had only said that this was the contested territory between China and Bhutan. But in 1988, when the talks opened, the Chinese made some new claims where in northern Bhutan, which together would be around some 450 square kilometers of territory in the Jaklung and the Pasmlung areas. Now, these are largely uninhabited areas. Nobody lives here. Okay. These are densely forested, uninhabited areas. Nobody lives here. And while this area has a lot of strategic importance, that's not the case with if the Doklam area has a lot of strategic importance, given the security, given the location of Doklam, that's not the case with the northern territories. But China made what we call as new claims in its 1988 negotiation, saying that this was always a part of China. Now, this raised eyebrows in both New Delhi as well as in Thimphu, because this was partly a reflection of how the Chinese were going to negotiate in the future. In the sense that the fear was that by making a new claim, the Chinese were going to strengthen their original claim. Meaning that on the negotiating table, the Chinese were now making a new claim, not with the intent of actually what? Not with the intent or seriousness of actually claiming the new territories, but with the intent of strengthening their claims on the original territory. Meaning what?
that the Chinese were saying to the Bhutanese that, look, you give us Doklam, or else we are now making a new claim in northern Bhutan also. And what you should do is that China was saying indirectly that we will give up our claims on northern territories if you give up your claims on the northwestern territories. This was what happened in the 1988 negotiation. Clearly, however, this was not everything was put on paper apparently, but this was what happened on the negotiating table in 1988. When the talks resumed, China actually was now in a position of making, or was now moving towards making, new claims. Now, however, China did not very strongly back these new claims in northern Bhutan. However, it made some claims. There's definite proof of that. Now, in 1993, what happened? India and China signed what is called as the Peace and Tranquility Agreement. India and China signed a Peace and Tranquility Agreement. In this agreement, it was said, क्या था इस agreement में? 1993. The border was unsettled. Where? Between India and China. India and China, the border is an undemarcated border. And in 1993, both sides said that that undemarcated border and the unresolved border must not come in the way of the larger India-China relationship. Meaning, India and China can work together, can deepen cooperation, and the larger India-China relationship must not be held hostage to what? To the border question. Meaning, and that we will maintain peace and tranquility where? At the border. And peace and tranquility at the border will continue till we resolve our border issue. But we will simultaneously allow relations to deepen in other areas. Which are other areas? Economy, cultural, people to people. Meaning, India and China will do trade with each other. India and China will do people to people contacts with each other, etc., etc. And for this, let's maintain peace and tranquility at the border, and no side will take what? Unilateral actions or territorial aggressions against the other. We maintain peace on the border and let cooperation in other areas continue. Okay. Why was this agreement signed? Because 71 to 93, India or 62 to 93, India-China relationship was largely at a standstill. There was no economic cooperation happening, no cultural, no people to people, and nothing was happening on the border also. It was largely a deadlock. Okay. And mind you, all of this is happening. कई चीजें समझने में थोड़ा समय लगेगा. But 91 is what? The collapse of Soviet Union and USSR. Now, in such a changing security scenario where a former close defense partner of India was no longer going to be there, meaning Russia, India was keen also on having some sort of understanding with whom? The Chinese. Okay. And so, for a variety of reasons, India and China went ahead and signed the Peace and Tranquility Agreement to, in one line, if I have to say, normalize what? Relationship. Between India and China, boost economic cooperation, or trade between the two countries, while maintaining peace. While maintaining peace at the border. Peace or tranquility at the border. Meaning no side will unilaterally change the status quo where? On the border. We'll maintain peace on the border and the relations will improve in other areas. And when the time is right, we'll settle the border as well. Okay? So it brought a temporary truce between India and China. Like sir, पता नहीं क्यों आप China हम तो भूटान पढ़ रहे हैं. Coming back to Bhutan. In 1998, 10 years after the 88 talks, there's the next, and talks are happening after this also. 88 के बाद भी intermittent talks are happening. The next major talks happened in 1998 between China and Bhutan. Bhutan says, China says, now very clearly and straightforwardly, that Bhutan must recognize China's claims over Doklam. And China will give up the claims over North. China will give up the claims over northern territories if Bhutan gives up the claim over the Doklam Plateau region. This is a very standard part of the Chinese negotiating tactic. To boost an original claim, they make a new claim and say that on the negotiating table, chalo tumhare liye ye humne chhod diya. You recognize our original claim. The same happened in the India-China war in Aksai Chin in 62. They said, you recognize our control over Aksai Chin, we'll recognize your control over Arunachal or the Northeast Frontier Agency. Okay, so it's a well-known Chinese tactic of making a new claim to boost the original claim. And that is what they did to Bhutan in 1998. They said to Bhutan, you go ahead and recognize our claim. On whom? Doklam will recognize your claims on northern territories, the Jaklang and the Paspanlang area. What did Bhutan say? Yes or no? No. Bhutan said no to this offer in 1988 also, then in 1998 also. India said no. In 1961, when Zhou Enlai, I have not told you this, but Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier, made an indirect offer to the Indian side, to Jawaharlal Nehru, you recognize our claim over Aksai Chin, we'll recognize your claim over Arunachal and the Northeast Frontier Agency region, NEFA region. India said no. What happened? 62 war. Claims again. China is making similar claims and is making an offer to whom? Bhutan. Bhutan did not take that offer. This is a big deal because Bhutan is no India. In terms of military size or the ability to defend itself, India does have significant military and economic capabilities to defend itself in a prolonged standoff with whom? China. But Bhutan has no ability in material or economic terms or military or economic terms to defend itself on its own. Vis-a-vis whom? China. So vis-a-vis China, while India can think of defending itself, that's not the case with Bhutan. And yet Bhutan goes ahead and rejects the package offer deal by China. It's a big deal because obviously this is being done keeping the larger India-Bhutan relationship in mind. There is enough reason to believe that New Delhi had expressed its strong reservations to Bhutan, that Bhutan must not sign such an agreement with whom? China, given India's sensitivities on Doklam. And Bhutan, largely sensitive to India's concerns, did not sign such an agreement with China. Rebuffing a power like China for a country like Bhutan is a big deal. Okay. And the Bhutanese are well aware of this fact that they have taken a risk by not accepting the package deal offer. You are like, sir, kya risk? मैं बताता हूं. In 2017, after the Doklam standoff happened in 2017. The Chinese have made new claims on the eastern side. the Chinese have made new claims on the eastern border of Bhutan, Tawang, and India region, saying that this is a part of China. दिया था ऑफर, नहीं लिया. The Chinese have made additional claims now. And the Bhutani monarchy is well aware of the fact now that time is running out for Bhutan. Something or the other has to be done on settling the border with China. ऐसे तो वो पूरा ही claim कर लेंगे. Okay. And it is very well understood that this is a pressure building tactic by the Chinese side on Bhutan. Much has happened since 2017. The Doklam standoff happened, firstly, which happened on the west of Bhutan. समझ बेचारे इतने से देश का इधर भी उधर भी सब मांग लेंगे. For a country of 7,50,000, it's a big deal. Okay. So 2017 Doklam standoff happened. 2020, what happened? 2021, your Galwan episode and the Ladakh standoff has happened. In 2021, Bhutan has gone ahead and signed now a memorandum of understanding with China. A memorandum of understanding with China that they will now work towards settling the border with China. But what does that MOU with China mean? We don't know, because the details are not out in the open. But there is enough reason to believe that the Indian government is well aware of whatever is happening on these border negotiations between China and Bhutan. India's core concern is Bhutan must not give up claims over Doklam. If they do, it is a security concern for India. In counter, what India has done is that India has proposed to Bhutan that we will build a road from India, from the Sakting Wildlife Sanctuary, connecting to Tawang in Arunachal. And this is the major highway that India will build, so that obviously what can be done? Troops can be mobilized. And Tawang is a strategically important area. So troops can be mobilized up till Tawang from Indian side into Bhutan. Has India mobilized any troops into Bhutan before? In Doklam, India mobilized troops coming from the western side of Bhutan, coming from the western side from Sikkim, and also coming from the western side from where? Sikkim, and also from Bhutan. So India is looking towards mobilizing troops from both sides. So India is saying we will build a road here and we will try it. If required, we can also mobilize troops here. So you see the situation is getting extremely complex. Not on one front, but multiple fronts. And pressure is building on Bhutan from the Chinese side. Okay. So there is a clear understanding that the time has come where Bhutan may take the big step of signing some sort of agreement with whom? China. And that may pose a concern for India. But if that is a concern, there are many points of reassurance also. The first point of reassurance is the relationship of the Indian government, that apart from the fact that economically economically Bhutan is dependent on India. Apart from that, there is also the factor that yes, for access to sea, Bhutan still has to depend on whom? India. क्योंकि north is Himalayas, वहां से sea access नहीं होना है भूटान का. Bhutan imports almost all of its oil from which country? India. भूटान का पूरा oil India से ही जाता है. India subsidizes oil supply to Bhutan also and supplies all the oil to Bhutan. In 2010, 2010 में, the Chinese Prime Minister, I'm not saying the President, the Chinese Prime Minister met the Bhutanese Prime Minister in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil on the sides of a climate change conference. By the way, as I told you, China does not have an embassy in Bhutan, nor does Bhutan have an embassy in China. In fact, they conduct their relations through the Bhutanese embassy and the Chinese embassy in New Delhi. Okay. So, and in 2007, देखा हमने वो फ्रेंडशिप ट्रीटी की बात करी थी, right? That 1949 friendship treaty. So I'll come to that friendship treaty, but basically, if you've understood this new claims and old claims, these claims were repeated. If you were to just write down those points briefly, the Chinese claims, Chinese repeated where the claims in the 1998 talks with Bhutan and offered to settle the border as a part of the package deal. Bhutan rejected the offer, but both sides also signed a peace and tranquility agreement. देखिए पहले इंडिया ने साइन किया, फिर Bhutan also signed a peace and tranquility agreement with China that no side will unilaterally change status quo. No side will unilaterally change status quo, but China keeps changing status quo unilaterally. और साइन कर दिया इसका मतलब ये नहीं है they are serious about it. ठीक है. So Bhutan rejected the offer. 2007 India and Bhutan revisited the friendship treaty. देखिए इसके पहले क्या हुआ, 2005 में Bhutan, which was till then only a monarchy, now became a constitutional monarchy. Bhutan still is a monarchy, but became a constitutional monarchy with multi-party democracy being introduced after 2005 in Bhutan. In Bhutan, there is no revolution. There is no public protest demanding that monarchy must shift to democracy. Instead, the Bhutanese monarchy made its own conscious decision of moving from monarchy matlab king is the absolute ruler, to constitutional monarchy, where king has limited powers, whereas majority of power go to elected government. So in 2005, Bhutan moved towards constitutional monarchy. And mind you, the monarchy in Bhutan is an extremely popular monarchy. Even to this day, the monarchy in Bhutan is an extremely popular monarchy. It's not like the monarchy of Nepal, as we will see, which was a deeply unpopular monarchy. Here, the monarchies are very popular amongst whom people. And so in this constitutional monarchy, still, however, with respect to foreign policy, the major today also, they made amendment to their constitution also. And in a new constitution that was put also, on foreign policy matters, the final say is with whom? The monarchy, not with the democratically elected government. Monarchy has the final say on foreign policy. Okay. जब आप पढ़ेंगे polity में constitution etc., we say कि okay, if you have a constitutional monarchy, then what are the powers of the monarchy have to be defined. Here it was defined largely that with respect to foreign policy, the powers will lie with the monarchy. Okay. Now, 2007 elections were organized, and a democratically elected government came to power in 2007. In 2008, elections were organized, and an elected government came to power. पार्टीज के नाम आपको याद रखने की जरूरत नहीं है, डीपीटी, डीएनटी, बहुत पार्टीज थी, ड्रुक, फेंशो, छोड़ दिया, आपको नाम याद रखने की जरूरत है. बट इलेक्शंस वर ऑर्गेनाइज्ड एंड डेमोक्रेटिकली इलेक्टेड गवर्नमेंट्स केम टू पावर व्हेन in 2008. But at the same time in 2007, a year before the elections, a new constitution had been put into place. It was already announced that multi-party elections would be organized, friendship treaty of India and Bhutan was revisited. Revisited meaning modified. On the demands made from Paro or from Bhutan, following the demands made from Bhutan, the agreement, the friendship treaty was revisited. I told you Article 1 and 2. So Article 2 was the one, and 1 and 2 both underwent a change, partly. And in Article 1, and more so in Article 2 predominantly, that you should remember, the change that happened was that, remember, in Article 2, we had said that with respect to foreign policy, Bhutan would be guided by India. Now it was said that Bhutan and India are not elder brother and younger brother. They are equal partners and friends in the relationship. And both will be mindful of each other's security concerns while conducting their foreign policy. That's all. पहले क्या था? Bhutan will be guided by India. ये line हटा दी. Bhutan is no longer going to be guided by India. Both are equal partners, meaning it is up to Bhutan which country it wants to do establish relations with. It doesn't need to be guided by India. But while conducting its relations, both sides will be mindful of each other's security concerns. Red Chumbi Valley. Context क्या है? फिर उधर तो लिखा है, जो लिखा है वो किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में लिखा है? That Bhutan may establish relations with third countries on its own without taking any permission or consent from India. But while doing that, Bhutan will be mindful of India's security concerns. What is India's security concern? Chumbi Valley, Doklam, and Bhutan not ceding Doklam to. यही मतलब. ठीक है, मुद्दा बस इतना ही है. ठीक है. So elections were organized in 2007. The friendship treaty was revisited to reflect this change. देखिए, आप सोच रहे होंगे सर क्या ये तीसरी कंट्री पे इतना टाइम, क्या सोचना है इतना? सोचिए कितना सोच रही सरकार, राइट? So the friendship treaty was revisited and Article 2 of the treaty was revised. Article 2 of the treaty was revised, under which it was said that both India and Bhutan are equal partners. And while conducting their foreign policy, both would keep in mind each other's security or strategic concerns. Both India and Bhutan were equal partners, and while conducting their foreign policy, both would keep in mind each other's security concerns. Then what happened? Between 2008 to 2012, the Bhutan's conduct of independent foreign policy saw that from 23 almost it expanded its relations with, from earlier its relations were with 23 countries, it expanded it to 53 countries. But still in these 53 countries, while it did give embassy, establish relations almost with 50 countries, with one country it did not establish. 50 दुनिया भर से कर रहे, लेकिन जिससे करना उससे नहीं हो रहा, because India's concerns are there. तो कंसर्न आगे बढ़ी और in this period in 2010, sorry 2012, the Chinese Prime Minister and the Bhutanese Prime Minister met on the sidelines of the Rio Summit, which was the climate change summit. And this meeting, however, was organized on the sidelines of the climate change summit, and the Indian side was not informed about any such planned meeting between whom? China and Bhutan. What happened in that meeting also was not known to India. India's fear, ये दे देंगे ढोकला, को मतलब ही नहीं हमको, बस वहीं पे है सारी सुई अटकी. Okay. India's concerns was that what transpired in the meeting is not known, and China and Bhutan conducted such a meeting of a sensitive nature without keeping Indians in the loop. Okay. 2008 के बाद 2012 election year, election time, 2 weeks before election, India cut off the oil supplies to Bhutan. Oil shortage in Bhutan, fuel prices rose, LPG price rose, government lost the election. This was when India had not attained independence also. It happened before 2014. And when India had a weak prime minister who didn't speak much. Right. So, but then that's okay. Chaliye. So, important long and short of this was that while India had gone ahead and revised the friendship treaty, its concerns were there over how Bhutan deals with China, and India played its hand very strongly in terms of arm twisting Bhutan to a certain extent, though Indian government denied कि हमने ऐसा कुछ किया ही नहीं. They said that Bhutan had not cleared the payments which were due, and so the Indian Oil Corporation took the decision of stopping the supply. Indian Oil Corporation is the PSU owned by the government of India. It cannot stop oil supply to a country which is fuel dependent on India unilaterally just because payment didn't happen on time. But India gave this long lengthy explanation, etc. And after 2 weeks, election over, India restored oil supplies full flat. You will see a similar thing happened in Nepal after the Madhesi crisis in 2015. वहां फिर ये हुआ कि हमने वो महीना भर के लिए oil supply काट दिया. But that's a more complicated situation where Indian side was not entirely to blame, because there was violence in the Terai region and there was a lot of instability in the Terai region in Nepal. But definitely here there was nothing of this sort. Long and short, India expressed its dissatisfaction, and this is when India was also accused of what? Bhutan. By Bhutan of big brotherly attitude, India trying to arm twist its smaller neighbor and blah blah blah. So there was a criticism of India's actions here in 2012. Following this, again, but after this, much things have happened in India-China relationship. I told you in 2017 what has happened. New claims in the eastern sector. In 2020, they have gone ahead and signed a memorandum of understanding with China, though the border has not been settled. Clearly, there is a realization that the time has come when Bhutan may either settle its border with China, and that is a matter of concern, or Bhutan may sooner than later may allow the Chinese to open an embassy. Where? In Bhutan. India's concern is that if the Chinese establish their strong presence in Bhutan, then Bhutan may go the Sri Lanka way, or Bhutan may go the Pakistan way, and India cannot afford to have a strong Chinese presence in Bhutan given India's security concerns in the region. So ये एक broad idea है. There are some more things that I'll discuss tomorrow and we'll wrap this up on Bhutan, and you'll also get a handout on the same. But this is the context. The challenge of the India-Bhutan relationship is this, that how does India maintain strong relations with Bhutan as the Chinese come knocking on the doors of Bhutan, to ensure that India's security concerns are respected by Bhutan, even while it engages China.